Background resonance signaling. What does that mean? In the background, different backgrounds upon the different surface layer realities of individuals, different surface level realities of individuals, collectively making the collective mundane plane for us to more or less participate in and move through that, earth field of that mutableness, and how we fixate from the moving mutableness, the fix, being could be in between mutable and cardinal, just depending on where you're coming from and where you're going to, as far as like, I guess your dream self respectively. Because you could ask yourself, how does reality really work? No choice could mean different things. Who am I sponsoring? Orange Ghost. No choice could mean different things. And one of those things is like, things are kind of calculated and surmounted based on different types of resonance, spiritual and mundane. And also the general jazz of mind, body, soul, emotion, that general jazz. So per that resonance, we're only in so much of control of those things. We can only nudge so much in those things. And as we're growing through those nudgings of those mind, body, soul, emotional complex already being like a living thing a long time ago, we have only a certain amount of select options we could make, something of like a particular compressed less choice. So willpower in the threshold, one of the gates for Virgo could be to like, within all of its analysis and it participating with the greater communities in general and how it, could organize communities and, be kind of like, kind of like assessful and analytical within its pursuit in, relations. Within that, it finds itself in, kind of keynoting in the heart chakra. And within the heart chakra, there's a willpower in the threshold. And with the willpower in the threshold is how you are an individual, but you're still more alike in the ocean of life, The sperm whale, metaphorically, creating all of these minnows and fish. And as all the minnows and fish are created and more or less, externally dispersed in something of an outward reality, they, in a different dreamtime level, they come back to an internal, kind of like new, paramount field of like a new creation for like a new, like different context of a surface level reality. So it's like differentiating yourself in how there's different, there's a distinction between control and management, and from like the mundane plane, how we get control is based on our own polarities and how we want to like manage ourselves and manage other people. So it has been kind of like watered down because before control, it was just esoteric management, right? Because things are being like maintained on a general order. So within, this whole family dynamic, what's going on here is what's going on in the family dynamic is we are eventually we got to like hatch out of our own shell, and we got to like, eventually the family pushes the bird off the cliff, in different ways. And as the family pushes the bird off the cliff, metaphorically or non-metaphorically, that is the challenge itself of life. That is like that's like one of the starting metaphorical life challenges. the family, and that's not good or bad. It's just like that's how the families in life and reality are having a standard quote unquote conditioning program, end quote, from the different vantage points and perspectives and contexts of what society is. Because within society there's different programs, and within society those different programs cater to different genetic families, and within those genetic families make unique communities, and within those unique communities sometimes we have to be outcast to find like who and what we are, to make ourselves an individual, and to differentiate ourselves from the rest. But recognizing, like, as the sperm whale is creating all of these minnows and fish and all these sea creatures, from that standpoint there's like before like needing to control, that's like a post effect. The need to control, before the need to control, there was a natural management. So there's a quote unquote macro challenge, end quote, from a natural management, creating something. And from that process of creation, somehow within many different infinite individuations, quote unquote, end quote, we found our own unique polarity dynamic way on how we could control with different dualities, and those different dualities more or less being balanced or imbalanced, and those polarities being more or less detriment or non-detriment. So that's like this is just a general kind of thing. Like there's a distinction between control and esoteric management. And if we don't make that distinction, then we're going to fall victim to like detrimental polarity dynamics of having the false illusion, and the false illusion, and the more so false pretense on how and why we want to control what we want to control. Because in the end, whatever you're trying to control, does it really, really, really serve the greater good or not? And is it compatible within the program that's being downloaded in the future reality? So let me take a sip of this. So within this family dynamic, so a certain keynote of Virgo, just seeing how reality changes, us contemplating how reality changes, and all the individuals are on their own subjective journey to overcome their own unique challenge of life. If we recognize everyone's diverse challenges, then we can recognize and get the gifts of every challenge to bring back to the genetic families, so the genetic families and the genetic gene pools themselves could heal. The gene pools from which they have been more or less quote unquote tampered with, end quote, the positive reapers, the angelic reapers, could come and resurrect and heal and restore the damaged gene pools. So there's angelic reapers, more or less, that reformulating itself as a new thing, reconstituting that, new energetic tribe to actually have a particular mission to possibly heal damaged genetic gene pools, because that's what's going on here. Everyone is in their own individual subjective journey. There's no choice could mean so many different things. And the no choice is like, also to connect it to what I'm saying here, is like there's a no choice aspect in how like the bigger picture does trump our individual self. And the bigger picture, it rearranges its multi-resonance dynamics accordingly. And that's the download we get from, and that download goes to everybody's unconsciousness body first, and then eventually perhaps their conscious body. And between the unconscious and the consciousness is their quote unquote mind, body, soul, and emotion conditioning that could be detrimental, quote unquote, and it could be like lower octave. So from the unconscious to the conscious, the download is slowed down. There's a lag in the download. So since there's a lag in the download, we're you know, we're not necessarily like aligning with, what quote unquote the new energy tribes of angelic reapers and how they could restore damaged genetic tribes, because in between our unconscious receiving energies, there's an energetic wall of conditioning that makes us have an energetic cognitive dissonance, not necessarily a mental one, but just an energetic one. The conditioning has accumulated as an esoteric plaque to like have a detrimental filter between our unconscious body and our resurfacing light conscious body. Light conscious body just being your visual animative self that is intertwined within your unconscious earth body. So no choice could mean different things because the multi-resonance dynamics, they're doing what they're doing, and we can only nudge so much based on our own maturation process. And within the long, arduous, enduring maturation process, the no choice eventually becomes to lesser choice, eventually comes to something of a more instinctive decision-making choice, and how we get a nudge within our mind, body, soul, emotional choice decision-making process and resonance process within ourselves, and how that could align to the bigger picture. Because no choice means the background resonance signaling agencies, they're lining up shit how they will do, and we can only get an idea of that so much based on our unconscious body and the conditioning that we're kind of taking away, and how our consciousness receives that. And Pluto being the subconscious, Pluto being kind of like a recycling agency behind all the planets, and kind of seeing like kind of just transforming their kind of quote unquote slack end quote accordingly. And obviously that could be like that could be more so allegorical than like, it doesn't necessarily have to be entirely like literal, but that's up to the perceiver to decide. So within this whole like we're connected to different families. We don't have to have a direct connection to the families. We could have an indirect connection, but the indirect to indirect connections, they could be fuzzy and false. But the indirect to indirect, they don't have to be fuzzy and false. They could become non-fuzzy and clarity wise. There could be an agreement, the exchange for like of goods, the exchange of trades, like my goods for your goods, general stuff like that. So there's new families being created in a meta allegorical context, and like we're connected to different families directly or indirectly, and those could be either detrimental. Those either could be in a detrimental health state or a non-detrimental health state. Just because you're directly connected to a genetic family that's similar, that doesn't mean there's always going to be agreements. There's always some dynamic of like, polarity, like, fragmented, like, this archetype for control. Control is something of just an archetype, it's an archetype that's in us, and how we and all the planetary celestial beings, they have their own natural theme for quote unquote control end quote, and the shadow of that is the unnatural theme of control, and that's the disarray chaos, and their quote unquote energy shadow end quote. We oscillate within that, and we develop a shadow, something of a shadow quote unquote archetype end quote, a particular context of one, where we carry on a trait of a certain type of inclination of how to quote unquote control end quote. But control could be just an illusion, because it's just an archetypical trait from a certain theme of how we go about life. And if and some of us lean towards more of the quote unquote shadow archetype of that end quote, And it's up to us to balance the shadow archetype with the original natural archetype so we could balance the theme of natural control within our relationship to the original balanced, healthy planets. Ooh. And if you heard yesterday's kind of theme podcast, like it's not always in that like that crunch mode style, you know. It was kind of like, yeah, last night's podcast, it was more or less kind of like, it was kind of stiff, you know. It like all like my presentations aren't always like that, you know. It's different every time, you know. I'm like versatile like that. But yeah, so don't sleep on the higher octave Virgos, you know. They could really like, you know, put things into like format for us, and they could put things kind of in like, you know, like a structured, mutable nature and format and what have you. So, yeah, thanks. And I think this one's complete. You know. Um, yeah. So no choice can mean different things, you know, and obviously, like, if you want the full kind of thing, then within your resonance, you know, it, if you are like, guided to align with this message, then then let the balance fates do their thing, and so the angelic reapers, they could they have a particular mission to possibly, I say possibly because humanity and society at large, they're caught up in the quote unquote shadow archetypes, end quote, that fragment. And that fragment is energetically quote unquote demonic, end quote. Not good, not bad. That's just how the energy has like unfolded itself to be, And within that, society has collectively like it's more or less leaning towards that. So it's up, and within that, using those natures, they kind of like detrimentalize eventually like things, genetic like gene pools and whatnot. So the angelic reapers, it's up to them, the new tribe of energy, to restore the genetic gene pools. And so willpower in the threshold to balance this Saturn day. Thank you very much.